George R. Martin loves to kill good men. We watched Ned Stark lose his head in King's Landing. We watched Robb Stark die at a wedding. And in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, we watched Prince Baelor Targaryen, the noble, just, and chivalric prince of the Seven Kingdoms, die in a muddy pit at Ashford Tourney, defending an obscure hedge knight he barely knows. For years, the default take has been that Martin is telling us a cynical truth. In a brutal world, good guys finish last. So you might as well make your peace with it. But I don't think that's the point at all. There is a much deeper underlying truth here. A lesson we can pull out of fantasy lore and apply directly to our political reality today. Martin isn't critiquing honor, I don't think. He is critiquing honorable blindness. He's exposing the dangerous delusion that your moral purity will protect you when your opponents have stopped playing by the rules. In 1919, sociologist Max Weber called this the gesinningsethiek, the ethic of ultimate ends. The insistence that keeping your hands clean, even when the predictable consequence is disaster. 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli warned us in The Prince that a leader who tries to act good in a world full of bad actors will inevitably come to grief unless they learn the art of virtù, tactical adaptability. And today, we have a striking case study of this in European politics. If you contrast Donald Tusk's institutional gridlock in Poland with Peter Magyar's constitutional crusade in Hungary, you see a head-to-head collision between these two exact political philosophies. And frankly, I find myself cheering for Weber's verantwoordingsethiek, the ethics of responsibility. So today, let's break down what George R. R. Martin was actually saying about power, rules, and honor, and what we, as participants in modern democracy, can learn from it. Welcome back to Actually, It Is That Deep. When people talk about George R. R. Martin's universe, they pretty much default to calling it cynical. Westeros is a place where good men die and bad men rule. We see it when Joffrey executes Ned Stark, and we see it again when Baelor dies in the Trial of the Seven in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Baelor Breakspear Targaryen is everything a prince ought to be under the romanticized ideal of feudal chivalry. He's wise, courageous, steady, universally respected. He isn't a corrupt courtier. He genuinely believes in the knightly code. So, when a landless nobody hedge knight named Sir Duncan the Tall strikes Prince Aerion to defend a helpless puppeteer, Baelor doesn't hide behind his royal privilege. Despite Aerion being his family, Baelor steps down into the mud at Ashford, risks his life in a brutal trial of the Seven against his own bloodline, and stands as Dunk's champion. It's a shining, romantic moment. In a standard high fantasy tale, Baelor would walk away with a dramatic scar and a triumph for justice. But Martin isn't writing standard high fantasy. Dunk's honor is vindicated, they do win the trial. And then Baelor removes his helmet, revealing his skull was caved in by his own brother, Maekar's mace. He drops dead in the dirt. The surface level reading is simple. Baelor died because Westeros is cruel, but mechanically, Baelor died because he mistook moral purity for functional strategy. In his famous 1919 lecture, Politics Evocation, Max Weber outlined two fundamentally opposing ways of acting in the political world. The first is ethics of responsibility, or verantwoordingsethiek. You measure your actions by their predictable consequences. If a decision predictably leads to catastrophe, You bear moral guilt for that outcome, regardless of how noble your intentions were. And the alternative is the ethic of ultimate ends, gesinningsethiek. You act strictly according to high moral principles, leaving the consequences to fate or the gods. If disaster follows, you wash your hands and blame the world for being evil. Baelor Targaryen and Ned Stark after him were operating entirely under the ethic of ultimate ends. Baelor stepped onto that field to do the right thing for one hedge knight on one isolated afternoon. But by doing so, he gambled the stability of the Seven Kingdoms. His death didn't just end his life, it extinguished the main line of succession, triggered decades of political turmoil, and eventually left the throne to far weaker, more unstable men. Baelor's hands were clean, and his chivalry was intact. But the consequences of his clean hands was a realm left vulnerable to monsters. And don't say he didn't have options. That's just not true. He had options. As Prince of Dragonstone and Hand of the King, Baelor could have used his authority to force Aeron to withdraw the challenge. He could have compelled Aeron into a one-on-one duel with Dunk, or he could have pressured his brother Maekar to command his sons to stand down. Instead, Baelor chose to act entirely within the narrow, unwritten confines of chivalric tradition rather than leveraging his actual structural power. Ned Stark does the exact same thing in a Song of Ice and Fire. Ned warns Cersei that he knows her children are bastards born of incest because warning a noble lady is the chivalrous thing to do. It was morally pure, in keeping with his caste, but tactically disastrous. It gave Cersei the window she needed to organize King Robert's accident and prepare for Ned to be taken prisoner. And that is the fatal flaw at the heart of the code. When you follow unwritten rules, you become predictable. Bad faith actors like Aeron Targaryen, or Cersei Lannister, or Walder Frey view unwritten rules as schematics to exploit honorable foes, rather than seeing those rules as sacred. And that, I think, is GRRM's true critique. Far from telling us that honor is useless, he's telling us that rule-bound honor is a weapon you hand your enemy. Exploring how leaders handle power is what inspired me to write my own political fantasy series, The Sangwheel Chronicles. Complete at 4 books, it dives deep into a fantasy world, which explores the questions of end justifying means and what leaders owe their followers. If you enjoy deep dive political world building where actions have real structural consequences, check out the links in the description below. Okay, enough of that. Back to the show. When honorable people lose, we love comforting ourselves with a clean narrative. They lost because the other side cheated, the evil side cheated. We tell ourselves that bad faith actors win simply because they step down into the gutter, while good actors remain untainted on the high ground. This excuse completely misunderstands how power operates. Bad faith actors don't win just by breaking the rules. They win because they understand the difference between the letter of the law and the unwritten norms. They operate within what Niccolo Machiavelli identified 500 years ago with The Prince, the conflict between the conventional virtue and the political virtù. Machiavelli wrote that a leader who attempts to act with conventional moral goodness in every situation will inevitably be destroyed by those who are not good. In my opinion, Machiavelli's The Prince is one of the most misunderstood texts in history. To be frank, Machiavelli explicitly despised tyrants and did not endorse cruelty for its own sake. He wrote The Prince because he understood that a leader's primary duty isn't to preserve their personal moral innocence, but it is to preserve and protect the community they lead. In A Song of Ice and Fire, the most dangerous villains are almost never the ones who outright ignore the law. They're the ones who weaponize the law as written while abandoning every unwritten gentleman's agreement that makes the system actually function. Look at Tywin Lannister and the Red Wedding. The unwritten norm of Westeros is guest rights, an ancient sacred social contract. But Tywin looks at the board, realizes that guest rights has no physical enforcement standing behind it, and uses Walder Frey to slaughter the Starks. Look at Littlefinger and Cersei during Ned Stark's arrest in the throne room in A Game of Thrones. Ned produces King Robert's signed paper decree declaring him Lord Regent. Ned believes royal ink will enforce itself somehow. Cersei simply tears the paper in half. Peace, honor, a fair trial, these are words. Words are wind. Ned relied on the assumption that the royal decrees are sacrosanct. He relied on the institution, forgetting that institutions exist because people defend them. Cersei and Littlefinger understood that. They understood that an institution only matters if there are people willing to defend it. And this brings us to the core mechanism of honorable blindness. Bad faith actors test boundaries. They violate unwritten norms because they know the honorable actor will refuse to retaliate in a kind of fear of degrading the system. Bad faith actors rewrite the mechanics of the system. They use formal legal channels to entrench their power, knowing that the honorable actor will respect those legal channels out of procedural habit and respect of institution. And then the bad faith actor forces a trap. The honorable actor is left with only two choices: break their own code to stop the threat, or follow the rules straight off a cliff. When you refuse to adapt to an opponent who has already abandoned the board, don't kid yourself. You aren't protecting the integrity of the game. You're ensuring that the people who hate the game get to write the final score. So, let's turn from fictional politics of Westeros to modern Europe and see how this trap plays out and how we can break it. Over the past 2 decades, we've seen a global rise in authoritarian movements utilizing a strategy called illiberal legalism. These would-be authoritarians used the letter of the law to systematically dismantle unwritten norms from the inside. They stack the courts, they gerrymander districts, and they capture public media under the banner of standard parliamentary process. When pro-democracy coalitions finally win power back, they inherit a rigged system, a veritable poisoned chalice, where they have to make a choice between these two brutal options. 1. Do you try to fix the house using traditional unwritten agreements, hoping that the system heals itself while you hold power before the population grows impatient? Or 2. Do you recognize that the old rules are dead and use the hard, explicit letter of the law to aggressively dismantle the authoritarian framework? First, let's look at Donald Tusk in Poland. When Tusk's coalition won power back from the far-right Law and Justice (PIS) party, he promised to restore the rule of law. But PIS had spent 8 years embedding partisan judges, capturing the Constitutional Tribunal, and leaving behind an opposition president equipped with a devastating veto. Tusk tried to play the role of Ned Stark. He attempted to undo these illiberal reforms through standard institutional etiquette, waiting for vetoes to expire, relying on conventional parliamentary decorum, as though institutions miraculously exist without people. The result, predictably, was total political paralysis. His opponents used the legal roadblocks PIS left behind to paralyze reform at every turn. By insisting on keeping his hands procedurally clean, Tusk got trapped in institutional gridlock. Now look at the contrasting example, Peter Magyar in Hungary. For 16 years, Viktor Orban built what seemed like an unshakable illiberal democracy, using constitutional tweaks and state media monopolies to ensure his Fidesz party couldn't lose. Traditional opposition parties spent over a decade acting like institutionalists, and they got steamrolled in every election. Magyar took a completely different approach, grounded in Machiavellian virtue. First, he bypassed the captured state media entirely, spending 2 years traveling to virtually every village in Hungary in a beat-up car to speak directly to citizens in town squares. And when his Taisa movement built momentum and he won the recent election now in 2026, Magyar didn't count on Orban's entrenched appointees voluntarily cooperating with him. He targeted them using the letter of the law. He pushed for hard structural reforms, pledged to limit prime ministerial terms to a maximum of 8 years, including for himself. And this is a constitutional reform he has already enacted. And he has initiated direct public consultations to draft a new constitution that will go to popular referendum to the Hungarian people. Magyar is acting with deep honor towards his people, but he understands what political theorist Jürgen Habermas called constitutional patriotism. True loyalty in a democracy isn't owed to unwritten agreements and institutions that bad actors have already destroyed and hollowed out. It is owed to the active creation and defense of a legal framework that protects the people who live in that polity. When Baelor Targaryen died at the Ashford tourney, or when Ned Stark was betrayed in the throne room, they were casualties of their own refusal to see the world as it is and to act to protect their people. Honor is not a shield that keeps your hands clean. It is an oath to protect others. If your opponent throws away the rules and you continue to play by them out of procedural habit or a desire for moral purity, you are abandoning the people that look to you for protection. To save the realm, whether in Westeros, Poland, or Hungary, you cannot rely on blind, passive honor. You need tactical intelligence, the courage to act on your convictions, and the willingness to use the law to fight for those you are sworn to protect. When the unwritten rules are broken, clinging to procedural etiquette is not a virtue. It's just self-destruction. If you enjoyed this deep dive into fantasy and political philosophy, hit the subscribe button to join the discussion. Check out the Sangwell Chronicles on the description below and let me know in the comments. Was Baelor Targaryen a hero? Or was he just recklessly blind?